Thank you for coming. My name is Charissa. I'm from the English department. I know that in this schedule that's full of AI panels, this is a little different, so thank you for stopping by and listening to this. Um, just gonna minimize this. Okay, so the title of this workshop is Decolonizing the Writing Class, Enabling Multiple Literacies for Intercultural Awareness. I want to just start with this brainstorm. So I want to get a sense of where you stand. What does a decolonialized classroom look like to you? I know you might be coming from different departments, so scan that with your phone, or I can paste this into the chat if you can't scan that. I think this is a good start. So non-hierarchical, an egalitarian learning community where all are equal knowers, yeah. Use of multiple knowledge sources outside the academy. All of these, I think they complement each other really well, right? Non-hierarchical is a big one because when we colonize something, we place it in an order of how someone would value it, right? Even though that's a construct. But yes, equal knowers, I think equal is the key here. Multiple knowledges, right? Not prioritizing one type of knowledge outside or over another. This is an excerpt from the Anti-Racist Writing Workshop by Felicia Chavez. And she talks about kind of decensoring the white standard voice in the classroom. And it's not limited to the writing context, but she talks about this Black student who, even though in her class there are readers or there's readings that have to do with diversity from diverse voices, her instructor is still teaching it with a white bias. And as a result, she can't totally read those things and write about it comfortably. So she writes, my history, my culture, my narrative were all interpreted through white bias and then explained back to me. So kind of having your experiences explained back to you kind of takes away your agency to speak on your own experiences. Students of color often perform extra labor to translate white universality into multicultural reality. There's this process of decoding that Chavez writes about, where these students have to kind of put themselves in the shoes of their professor, think about what they expect them to take away from these readings, and kind of produce work that reflects that in order to meet those standards. So it's kind of like you're decoding it, you're performing the role of a student who is reading these texts. But you're kind of decentering yourself and your own experiences. And that is what a colonized classroom looks like. So colonization can manifest in multiple ways, but this is just, I want to zoom in on this particular example just to demonstrate. But we've probably heard of the term standard academic English or standard English. English is an example of something that is rooted in colonialism. Bruce Horner writes, English as a lingua franca creates a monolingual bias and often promotes a limited perspective on what constitutes linguistic competence and academic success. English as a lingua franca, so English as a currency, something that gets you around in the world, gets you work, gets you opportunities, but it is rooted in something that is a monolingual bias. This idea that there is only one correct English, and that is the correct one, that equals competence, success, intelligence. And that really obviously limits other forms of literacies. This was an attempt by Braj Khatru to level the types of Englishes that existed. So he thought about this hierarchy and standard English, and he wanted to create an image that showed a variety of Englishes to teach people that all of these different Englishes exist. They all have their own grammars. They're all valid. However, there's no real way to represent that visually without establishing some kind of hierarchy. So you see in all of these models, there's a center circle, and it branches out into an outer circle and then an expanding circle. It might be a little hard to see. This is the one that is used the most, but paying attention to the Englishes in each of these countries, you kind of notice the effects of colonization on which country's English is considered inner, outer, and expanding. Inner is where English is the lingua franca. It is the language that you need to know in order to get through spaces of professionalization, education. Outer circle, English is helpful, but it is paired with that country's heritage language. Expanding circle, English isn't even needed necessarily to deal with everyday life, everyday exchanges. Um, all of these different uses of English are valid, and linguistic diversity exists in all of them. However, the way that they are ordered has to do with colonialism. So when we standardize something, we're not just saying that this is the prestige model. We are normalizing it and moralizing it. Kramsch writes that because norms allow people to anticipate events, they often acquire a moral rigidity and righteousness that engender stereotypes and even prejudices. They tend to make one's own ways of thinking, speaking, and behaving seem as natural as breathing, and the ways of others seem unnatural. Culture is always linked to moral values, notions of good and bad, right and wrong, beautiful and ugly. So when we standardize a language, we are standardizing not just the thing that is spoken, but the identity that's tied to it, the cultural practices that are tied to it. Whether or not we are aware of it consciously, we are moralizing difference and standard. We're attributing what is moral, what is natural to the things that we standardize and don't standardize. So the implications are more than just on an intellectual level. It's personal as well. So I am working through the framework of intercultural competence as a way to decolonialize the writing classroom. And if you're not a teacher of writing, you probably do some form of writing in your classes, right? So I think this applies across the curriculum, but intercultural competence is the ability to critically or analytically understand that one's own and other perspectives are culturally determined rather than natural. So trying to decenter this idea of the standard is to decenter this idea that there is a natural and therefore an unnatural, but rather to understand that every perspective is culturally determined. It's determined by social interaction, cultural factors, lived experiences. There is no one set of cultural experiences that is quote unquote natural or normal. The steps to ICC, these are some steps, and they're kind of self-explanatory. But attitudes means that in order to even have a shot at reaching ICC, you want to have an open attitude, right? So if I am looking at a culture outside of my own and I genuinely want to learn about it, that means that I have to have an attitude of curiosity and open-mindedness about it. From there, I have the capacity to gain knowledge of the discourses within that culture. So here I'm gaining kind of book knowledge. I am able to absorb objective knowledges about the practices of this unfamiliar culture. From there, I move to skills of interpreting and relating. With this knowledge, I'm able to apply it in real-time settings. Well, no, I am moving ahead. With this knowledge, I'm able to critically evaluate the knowledge. So here, I'm not just taking the knowledge at face value, but I'm able to critically read it, think about what you might disagree with in terms of the cultural values of a group of people, what you might agree with, what you might feel like on the fence about. From there, skills of discovery and interaction means that now you can apply this knowledge and this critical thinking in real-time interactions with members of the culture. You're able to step into an actual physical community, speak with members of a different culture, and be able to negotiate different conflicts, different value systems, have a conversation with them. Critical cultural awareness is the goal. you're able to, as a result of this knowledge, develop your own positionality within the culture's discourses. You gain a greater understanding of not just this culture, but of yourself. That means that your value systems are malleable, right? You are willing to maybe change your points of view on certain things, but you are more comfortable navigating in and out of these spaces, familiar and unfamiliar spaces. When I try to apply this principle in the classroom, I like to start with this text, James Paul G's What is Literacy? And essentially, it just lays out what discourse communities are, what literacy is. A discourse, socially accepted ways of using language, thinking, and acting that can be used to identify oneself as a member of a social network. So, in short, right, a discourse is something that identifies you as a member of a community. So if I understand the debates that are going on in a culture, if I understand the jargon, or the behaviors or the controversies that go on within a community, that means that I'm familiar with its discourses. Discourse community is something that brings together these commonalities. So if a community has shared public goals, participatory communication, genres, lexis, knowledge threshold for membership, so something that everyone is expected to at least have familiarity with, it signals membership in a discourse community. And dominant discourse, similar to standard English, this is something that you are expected to know in order to have social currency. And it's something that is met usually with the least conflict. It's the least controversial discourse. Most people just kind of take it for granted. Of course, English is the lingua franca. After introducing these concepts, I move on to this activity called discourse community mapping. A discourse community can be primary or secondary, so G outlines this in his piece. A primary discourse is learned in an informal setting, usually from socialization and immersion. So this is something that you don't learn in I guess, a formal settings, right? So you grow up in it. This is something that you learn almost organically. Usually it's your first language, traditions that you grow up with. Right, family behaviors, etiquette, things that you're raised in that you don't need to consciously absorb. Secondary discourses are settings that are formal, such as learning academic English. Academic English is kind of everyone's secondary discourse, right? No one grows up speaking that as their first discourse. Maybe there are a few exceptions. But that is something that is very specific to an institutional setting. Also, job skills. That's something that you learn secondarily when you enter a job. Discourses, so like I outlined earlier, right, discourses can include everything from cultural practices, conversations and debates, norms, such as clothing, music, etiquette, taboos, values and ideologies, histories, texts, and also stereotypes and misconceptions. I think that's an important one. Like I mentioned earlier, discourses in a culture are not just what the culture make of it, but it's also, unfortunately, the stereotypes that are attributed to that culture as a result of dominant discourses. So being aware of those is also a way to kind of decenter and interrogate where those stereotypes come from. I want to show you an example of my discourse community map. I always like to model activities before I ask my students to do it, especially things that ask them to share like personal aspects of themselves. So that's my name. And this is a combination of primary and secondary discourses. So speaker of English as a second language, that's a secondary discourse. First generation college grad, that's a secondary discourse. Writer, secondary. Researcher, secondary, right? I wasn't born as either. That's something that I acquired. Speaker of Cantonese Chinese as a first language, that's primary. Asian American, that's primary. So I was raised in it. That's not something I had any control of. That was my prescribed quote unquote identity. Now that I've outlined my primary and secondary discourses, for each one, I'm telling you a little bit about the discourses connected to them. Obviously, it's not limited just to two, right? But this is just to get them to get started thinking about how nuanced their identities are. So, Asian American, when we think about Asian American, right, if you have a hyphenated culture in any way, it's kind of considered like you're in between. There's a discourse often that you don't belong in one or the other, and that's kind of a challenge and a common experience faced by those with those dual identities. There's the model minority stereotype that's attributed to Asian Americans, right? I can unpack that with a totally different presentation, but generally it has to do with even though they are minorities, they are upheld to this different standard, this unrealistic and stereotypical standard. And usually that is harmful to all parties involved, but this stereotype has been used to pit Asian Americans against other minorities. Another example might be as a researcher, these are different topics that I like to research: cultural rhetorics, translingualism, second language writing. First generation college grad, Standard American English as my third language because my first language was Cantonese, my second language was English, my third language was Standard English. Also, I come from an immigrant family, and oftentimes when we talk about immigrant families, we talk about having this American dream that motivates them to come to the United States, and informs what they expect of their children, right? In my case, it had to do with graduating college and gaining success in that way. So a lot to unpack there, but that's just some examples of primary and secondary discourses and the discourses that are associated with them. So hopefully this makes sense because I want you to do this yourselves now. Um, okay, I'm gonna share this link with you in the chat first, but don't go there yet. Have you guys been able to view my slides? Please say yes. Okay.
Yes.
Uh, all right, so go to that page. And have we used Canva before? Yeah, I can't see the rest of you, but if you haven't, I've pasted my mind map here, right? And I want you to just consider creating your own. So pick any of these templates that are already here. If none of these appeal to you, feel free to, oh wait, are you not seeing my thing? You're not seeing my thing. How have I not learned? Um, like a whole pandemic happened and I haven't learned how to do this. Okay. So pick any of these templates, fill it out in a similar way that I have. There's no quota on how many primary or secondary discourses you need to lay out, right? You could do all secondary, all primary if you want, any combination. And for each one, just tell me a little bit about the conversations, the customs, the values, the stereotypes that are associated with each. If you're not satisfied with any of these templates, you should be able to go to designs. Wait, designs and search mind maps. I can't see this for some reason, but if you go to, where is it? Okay, it's not working for me, but let me know if you can't find it. It
Like
was
we're
working for me
doing
just
it
earlier.
live at this link.
Mhm.
We're doing this live at this link, like duplicate and work in this link that everyone can see.
Correct. You don't need to duplicate anything. You could just work directly on here. But yeah, pick any template, fill it out. No right or wrong way of doing it. You could duplicate mine, but yeah, below you could pick any of those too. So maybe let's take like 8 minutes to do this. Yeah, Marissa, if you want me to share the slides with you, feel free to contact me. I'll have my email at the end. I'm gonna go ahead and delete the ones that are not being filled out so they're not cluttered.
Canva. Do we get Canva for free?
What's up?
Oh, I'm sorry. No, this is Canva.
Yes. Are you able to get to it?
Yeah, I just jumped in, and so my
Oh,
apologies. So I'm just kind of gonna take a look, and then I'll send you an email to
sure. Yeah. Feel free to jump in. Like maybe you can kind of infer what's
see
going
this.
on. But I can give you like a quick recap of what I just said, if that would help.
That would help.
Okay.
Sorry.
So do you see the link in the chat?
Yes. No.
Okay.
Wait. The
No.
link in the chat. Sorry.
I'll post it again.
Let me come in down. Let me scroll down and close this.
I think it was posted again
Oh,
there.
there it
Yeah, I
is.
just put
Okay,
it there.
got it.
Okay, thank you.
Perfect.
So you'll see from that first map, right, with my name, Charissa,
Yes.
uh, it'll take I might not unpack all the concepts in great detail, but in short, these immediate bubbles that are here, right, these are kind of identifiers for who I am. So first generation college grad, writer, researcher, right? These things kind of like this, and this were things that they're considered secondary discourses. And that means that I'm not born with these identifiers. There's something that I gained later on through experience.
Mm-hmm.
These two, Asian American and speaker of Cantonese, these I was kind of raised into. I had no conscious recollection of learning Cantonese. It wasn't a methodical experience. It was just something that I learned because I was immersed in it. And Asian American, yeah, I'm just born it. I was born Asian in America. And these are discourses that are related to each one. So, for instance, discourses for a writer. These are different things that I like to write, different genres. Different discourses for speaking English as a second language, a means of assimilation. So for me personally, learning how to speak English proficiently was a way to assimilate. And that came from, right, my immigrant parents and that quote unquote American dream expectation. And also the awareness that it was a lingua franca. So I needed to assimilate to this language because it was the currency that would help me kind of get ahead in America, was the ideology. So a discourse can be anything like from um, it could be a belief, it could be a stereotype, it could be a value system, it could be specific lived experiences. It could really be anything. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Let's do 5 more minutes. And let me know if you have any issues like creating a map. I know it could be like glitchy.
Okay, let's see what I have here.
Hmm. I like that. The note that NYC is a language. I like the quotes too. It takes a village, right? Like within a family or within a discourse community, there are sometimes idioms that guide that community. Okay. There's enough of us that we don't need breakup rooms, but I don't want you to be self-conscious with me monitoring your conversations. So I'm going to put you in a breakout room anyway. Um, but I want you to just share the screen. Let's take a few minutes. And this is what I do in class too. I have students do a discourse community map. And afterwards, in order to kind of get to that ICC model, I want them to actually converse with each other, get to know each other's discourse communities, reflect on which they're familiar or unfamiliar with, in the hopes that maybe there is one that they want to latch onto and research and hopefully gain that kind of intercultural competence. I don't expect you to reach that whole thing, but as kind of an exercise, I want you to just talk briefly, give a brief overview of your map. What is one discourse community that you have in common? And how are your memberships and experiences in it similar or different? For instance, my experience as an Asian American, the discourses associated with it might be very different than someone else who is Asian American, right? So just because you share a discourse community doesn't mean you share discourses. So where might you diverge? What is one discourse community of your peers that you do not belong to? So what is entirely unfamiliar? But maybe you've heard a little bit about it. So what do you know about it, if anything? Where did that knowledge come from? This is an opportunity also to think about stereotypes. If you're aware of a stereotype of a discourse community, where did that come from, right? What is the impact perhaps of colonization on that stereotype? And what would you be curious to learn more about it? So feel free to talk about anything outside of these, but essentially I want you to just give each other an overview of your maps and talk to each other, put them in conversation with each other, if that makes sense. Does it make sense? Okay, I'm gonna attempt to do this.
But it's literally just Kendra, Eva, and me, right? Like, why don't we
Yeah,
just have a conversation?
we can. I like low key, I don't want to just like I guess we can. Yeah. I didn't want to make it feel like I was monitoring your conversations, but we can do that if you
I
want.
mean, I super appreciate the ethic that you come from, and I respect whatever Kendra and Eva want, but like, I think I would be comfortable modeling this on the FDD recording.
Okay, yeah. That
What do
makes
you guys
sense.
think?
Would we be
Yeah,
comfortable with
that's
that?
okay with me. I was struggling with the map itself, so I'll just kind of look at yours and then I'll talk
Yeah,
about each of the little pieces, if
perfect.
that's all right.
Yeah, and there's no one right way to map, right? If you want to just wing it and speak on it out loud, that's fine too, right? You can kind of enter the conversation that way. Okay, yeah,
Thank
let's do
you.
that.
I appreciate that.
So let me go here. Do I see you? Yes, I do. Yeah, who wants to get the conversation started? Give me a tour of your
I mean,
map.
I'm the one that was like, let's go. So
Go ahead.
I mean, I think the way I have interacted with you just now is perfect encapsulation of the map. Like my communication style when I spoke up, trying to use humor to like make the situation easy, like that sort of thing. It's all represented in the map. So I'm Marissa, uh, lifelong New Yorker. My father is like Brooklyn Italian as opposed to Italiano. And my mother is Ashkenazi Jewish, but not like the super religious kind, but culturally. And so both of those primary, is that right? The primary discourses that I had no choice over, I'm supposed to be funny. Like Italian Americans in media are funny, and Jews, New York Jews, we're funny, right? But people think Jews are smart and people think Brooklyn Italians are dumb, right?
Mm.
And so there's like a little bit of a paradox there. So
Hmm.
then that is continued by, I guess, where I should have moved out to secondary, that I chose to acquire like the high levels of education, but it
Hmm.
comes from the primary identity that on the Jewish side, like even my mother, who's 75 years old, had a master's, whereas my dad on the Italian side, they were all like food service truck drivers, like low levels of formal education. And so the Jewish side kind of channeled me into both like academic spaces and radical politics that each have their own discourse.
Mm.
I'm
That's
fluent
good.
in both of those, right? But the Italian side is like more culturally comfortable for our students. Like many of our Hispanic students or our Black students, I face stereotypes for being too loud, too much. My department chair has like tone policed me to the point where they asked me to keep my hands on the table at a meeting because of the way I gesticulate, right? Like that sort of thing. But I'm a full-time professor with a PhD. So like I have legitimacy in the radical politics. I'm the faculty advisor for Students for Justice in Palestine, but I also speak
Mm.
SAE and I taught writing in the disciplines in the English department, the social science class a couple semesters ago, where I'm trying to also like treat SAE as a tool that like our students can use to manipulate oppressive systems and uplift themselves, right? But I'm so accessible to them because I'm a New Yorker, because I'm kind of casual, because I'm being motivated by both heritages to be funny and like easy. It ends up making who I am as an educator.
Mm.
Mm. I like that because it's like you're pointing out the things that set you apart from the dominant discourse of what a professor needs to look like, act like. And those things that set you apart are what allow you to connect with your students. Right? So I think that that's really important, right? Understanding the things that make you different and yet work to your advantage, right?
And
Different can be a good thing. But I also like that you pointed out that SAE, right? It's not that I'm saying we should abolish it, but that we understand the role of colonization in it, right? So helping students understand that this is not the marker of morality or correctness or intelligence, helping them understand that we use SAE just like we use any other language strategically is the key, right? So this is kind of an exercise to get them to do that.
And just like concrete examples to respond to what you're saying, two things came to mind. One is for any of you interested, I'm the faculty advisor for the Annual Review of Criminal Justice Studies, which is an interdisciplinary journal of undergraduate papers from San Francisco State and us at John Jay. And we're in the
Mm.
middle of our peer review process right now. And
Mm.
we accept papers in SAE if the student uses their agency to want to use that as a writing sample for places that gatekeep with SAE, or we accept more creative, like emotional kind of writing that may or may not be in SAE or even English, right? So, like, that's one thing where I'm kind of like, it's a tool like anything else. Choose your own adventure, and I'll support you. And then on the other side, I feel like we're in this very racially charged environment where there's a lot of Black or POC versus white. And I
Mm.
think what's really important, like you brought up about being minoritized, but also being model minoritized, right? Like I'm white and I very clearly benefit from being white given my career path. But I'm also trying to show the students that all of us, regardless of the political implications, at the identity level and how we speak, like I am no more related to like a British person than they are, right? Like being New Yorkers, being Italian, like living in neighborhoods together. there are ways that I am actually more
Gendered
similar to
American.
them despite my whiteness, right? So that was just what came to mind when you spoke.
Yeah, I think like, and that's part of the hope for these maps is realizing we might have more in common than we think, even if our discourse communities are different, that the discourses can be shared.
Yeah,
But
and like
yeah,
I
and if
didn't have this pre-formulated at all. Like your exercise made me realize this.
that's awesome. Yeah, I mean, and it's great just to like as an exercise to realize that you are such a dynamic person, right? Like when we find ourselves kind of performing just a singular identity, especially like the identity of a professor or a researcher, we tend to
Right.
forget these other sides of ourselves.
Right. What I really appreciate about your map, Marissa, is that for me, the what I instantly connected to was the notion of sort of being in between spaces, right? And being able to kind of navigate in different spaces as a result of some of the identity um categories of identity that we have, right? So, I'm Puerto Rican, I'm first generation college student. The notion of in the educational system of being perceived as dumb or foolish because I spoke a second language, right, and started off with the second language, right, was a component that kind of informs everything, a lot of the things that I do as that full-time professor, with the PhD, right? um, and so the other pieces that I think that I really related to was this sort of native New Yorker, right, vibe that we all have, I think, when we grow up in New York City. We sort of have a New York City arrogance about us, to be quite honest with you. We might see that famous actor or something on the corner and just ignore them, right? Where the rest of the country goes, "Oh my God, that was Robert De Niro there." And I'm like, "Yeah, that's Robert. Let me keep going. He lives downtown. I live uptown." Right? So that sort of energy that's there. And I think that also um helps, I think, our young people and our students become a little bit more relaxed in the classroom. I don't know, sometimes I think it works in two ways for me. So on the one hand, it's sort of like, oh, you know, uh, she's keeping it real, right? And she's letting us know what the dynamics are in higher education. But at the same time, I feel like there's always this other expectation that my students have of, I want you to be professional. I want you to, be that professor that's kind of, you know, the representation, right, of someone who, quote, made it, right? So I always feel like there's that little struggle that I sense in the classroom. I came into the conversation a little late, so I apologize for that, Carissa.
That was
Um,
amazing. That response was
Yeah,
exactly what I
you
think she
picked up
wanted.
on this pretty quickly.
but and then I love this idea also of the funny, right? That we enter the space with laughter and comedy. And I think that's a real strength for educators, especially in higher education, and I don't think we use it enough,
Mm.
right? I really don't. I don't think we use it enough to draw people in and to create community, especially with our students.
Right. Yeah, there's like I was saying earlier, if you kind of subvert the expectations of what your role should look like, that is what can hook the students, right? Make it more effective and build trust. Yeah. Kendra, did you want to share yours or make any connections?
Sure. I guess, one of the initial thoughts that I had as I was trying to map out some of this stuff, was just thinking about intersectionality. And, I found myself putting one of the third level bubbles, under working class, and then actually moving it to female. And, just how all of these things, as we're talking about, are so connected. And it can be difficult, I think, sometimes to really locate um, what discourse these norms or taboos even come from. So that's more of a meta comment, but so much of what you were both talking about resonated, and then other things, of course, differ. But being a first generation college student, and some of the pressures that come with that, the expectations that come with that. And then I think kind of relatedly, maybe the imposter syndrome, or maybe
Right.
the overcorrection of professionalism, and putting on this mask, and trying to be this thing that is so different from your family and so distant from your family. Um, what else here? I am not as maybe related to the imposter syndrome and the overcorrection. I am not as easily able to talk about these things in group settings. So I also want to label that, and I so appreciate Ava and Marissa's approach to your maps. It's something I admire and something I'm working on. So maybe I will leave it there.
Oh, I'm really glad you brought up the imposter syndrome. That didn't even occur to me
Yeah.
as a first gen college student. That is a common phenomenon, right? Like similar to working class college students, right? Like if you come from a more marginalized population, you often have to feel that pressure to mask. I like that you brought up that word too. But yeah, intersectionality. Even though we're trying to like map out these different discourse communities in a somewhat separate way, they're all connected. We are intersectional beings, but we intersect with others too. And I like that you were thinking about levels too, right? Even
Mhm.
from the second levels, the discourses, you can branch out even more,
Right.
and think about the sub discourses.
And I think that one of the contrasts I see, Kendra, with you being like more low key about it, and I'm like, here's my entire life, is that like it has some externalities with the boundaries that we need to have, right? And you're probably better at this as a clinical psychologist because I'm just like a radical educator. I have my PhD in
I
sociology.
love you,
So my
Marissa.
office is like where all the students hang out and they ignore me, like, and just chill in my office, right? So, it has pros and cons. And
Mhm.
Charissa, I think a few semesters ago, you actually had a class that met in the same room as me
Oh,
right after mine. Do you remember? And
okay.
I was pain in the ass. Like you were like trying to get in 2 minutes before your class was supposed to start. And I literally had like four students surrounding me, not letting
Yeah,
me in
no,
the room. And
I
so like,
totally,
do you
I
remember
did not
that?
realize that was you.
That, yeah, like I remember you. So like, because I felt bad that you didn't have the time to center yourself and set up and get ready to like speak your way in your class because my way of being, opposite of Kendra, maybe closer to Ava, leaves me in a position that isn't always great as a faculty member.
Hmm. Well, I mean, I felt bad too for whatever it was worth, like to interrupt your conversations with students. But I think, yeah, that speaks to another kind of like, yeah, how much space do institutionalized spaces have for someone who defies a dominant discourse behavior, right? Like, we still have to work within these confines.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
and
and part of it is this question also of community building, right? Community building is about engagement, it's about interacting and connecting, and sometimes it doesn't have a time frame, right? To
Mm.
it doesn't go with the sort of the institutionalized time frames that get put in play. But
well,
um
and I think it's really interesting that we seem to all like be women here. So we have
Yeah.
that in common, regardless of our
interesting.
backgrounds. But at John Jay, I would say there's a subcultural discourse where it kind of sucks that there's so many white faculty members and so many students of color from immigrant families. And
Mm,
I don't want to speak for Kendra, but one of the ways we're being conditioned now is don't take up too much space, don't talk about yourself, like don't act
right.
like you're the same, you don't get it, like that sort of
Hmm.
thing. And I
Right.
think that that's like really relevant to what you're trying to do here. Because the other side of this, my students have talked about having to like dumb down their writing so no one thinks it's AI, like,
Mm.
but that means they speak SAE and they're not using it. And then I'm coming around being all like open book and not recognizing that while I am like a young woman in academia, I have the white privilege. Like it just hits all the points. And I think it's so cool the way the three of us, or and the four of us, happen
Hmm.
to cross these identities in ways to like bring this to the fore so clearly.
And from like a person of color standpoint, there's often an expectation that if you are a professor of color, you need to teach to your difference. You need to teach
Yeah.
about diversity, about race,
Right.
like the representative. And conversely, that if you're a white instructor, you are quote unquote the natural instructor, the normal, the standard, and therefore you have more flexibility to teach how you want. So that's another, it's
Yeah.
unfair on both sides there.
Mm.
So we have 3 more minutes. Did anyone want to say something else? This actually brings me to the last slide, which I'm going to. So obviously, I think that this process helps all of us on a personal and intellectual level. I know that it's guided me a lot when I felt like, who am I? Like, had those existential moments, like, is this all that I am? Feeling like you're putting all your eggs in one basket. But I do want to mention this, which is kind of what we just got at. But individualistic cultures, such as Western cultures, such as America, it may be harder to implement lessons such as this, because people who are raised in an individualistic culture are used to having their experiences centered. So
Mhm.
to convince them that there's no necessary natural way of living, or natural English or standardization, might take a bit more effort to be like,
Mhm.
hey, actually, your experience is just one among many. They're all valid and they all interact. And your experiences are socially and culturally constructed. They're not inherent to you. But there is hope. All right, it might be easier for communal cultures, but for individualistic cultures, an exercise like this helps them understand that their discourses are subjectively constructed, they're symbolically mediated, they're not predetermined. So,
Mhm.
right, just to summarize, decolonialized classroom challenges a singular way of being and languaging, honors different discourses and literacies. So, one of you mentioned that at the get go, expands what academic success and language proficiency can look like, and frames culture as socially constructed and constantly emergent, right? It's important even to note that standard English is constantly changing. All
Right.
language is alive and changing. So, when we denaturalize even the standard, then it kind of may hopefully help students realize like, oh, not anything is set in stone, right? So everything is moving as long as it's culturally impacted.
Mm. I think it's really interesting also. I had a student that was adopted. She was a person of color. She was adopted into a white family, right? And she was taking an ethnic studies class, right? And I mean, she was just blown away. Like she couldn't process everything that we were covering. And part of it, right, was because all these discourses were playing themselves, right, against her. And she couldn't, like she was like, well, no, that's not necessarily true because, in my family, and so she was dealing with a whole lot of layers, right, that were um, pushing up against her and that were embedded already, right? And so by the end, it was at the end of the semester, she really struggled, right, to read through some of the material. It was very, we were constantly having conversations. It was good because we were constantly having conversations during office hours, but uh, uh, it was a very emotional process for her in terms of her learning that semester, particularly with a lot of the content. So she was a Latina young girl, adopted, right, early on, lived in an all-white community, very conservative community, right? So it wasn't even radical politics, right? It was like she was in a really conservative community, and so it was, she was really struggling with all of the things that she was learning.
Wow. Yeah, that's a very intersectional experience,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Right? Being a visible person of color and yet being adopted within a dominant discourse community is
Mhm.
tough. I think we are out of time.
Yeah, we're
And
past 12:30.
and I know
Ah,
you have your lunch if you are on campus, but let me just give you my email. Feel free to contact me. This was a really enriching meeting. I'm glad this was a small group. It felt really cozy. I got to know all of you. I hope to see you on campus. But yes, please stay in touch. And thank you for sharing parts of your identity with me and each other.
thank you so much. This was
Thank you so
great.
much. Yes.